So if we begin thinking about, the threats that the Weimar Republic were facing, there was a lot of, there were a lot of threats from both the left and the right. When we think about politics, these phrases of like left wing and right wing, they come about a lot. And if we think about the Weimar government, they were quite liberal. So if you see my arrow, they were sort of kind of in the center of our spectrum. And as you can see, the spectrum sort of shifts and moves from left to right. And if the Weimar government is seen as, being central, if you sort of move left, you move into this region of, socialist ideologies, okay? And these ideologies appealed quite a lot to the working class people. And then if you move even further to the left, you have this idea of communism. It's quite an extreme idea of the country is run on behalf of all workers. You have these ideas of equality, that actually everything is state run, okay? And that everyone, sort of has the same as each other. That's quite an extreme ideology to hold for some people. If you sort of have a look on the other side and you sort of move towards the right, you have this idea of conservatism, and conservatism, sort of appealed more to middle class people. And if you sort of go towards the extreme right, you have these ideas of nationalism and fascism. And within the context of Germany, that would be the idea that Germany would have this one strong leader and that everybody would obey that leader, okay? You have these ideas of capitalism and privatization where individuals gain, and that obviously differs to communism where you have the idea of, a shared community. And the reason why, these extreme ideas clashed with the Weimar Republic is because they were so different to what the Weimar Republic was offering. Okay, they were, there was such a big difference, which is why that tension arose.
What you've got to remember is, whenever we're studying this, the right wing and the left wing don't like each other. Okay, so if we were in a classroom and we were drawing this on a board for you, hand drawing it, the word hate would have to appear in the middle. Okay, because the either end of the spectrum, they just hate each other. They don't like each other at all. But there is crossover where some of the things start to seem very similar as well. So although working class people were very well drawn towards communism, they were also extremely drawn to nationalism and fascism, because both ends of the spectrum kind of offer them solutions to the problems that they've been facing. If you were looking at our country today and you wanted to sort of understand this, socialism on the left, is where you find the Labour Party. On the right-hand side is where you find our Conservative Party. If you want to go a bit further to the right, is where you'd find UKIP. If you wanted to go a bit further to the left, you'd start to find groups like the Socialist Worker Party. And then if you wanted to go properly to the right for this country today, it's where you'd find groups like the EDL and the now defunct BNP. Those kind of groups you'd find on the far right. On the far left, you would find the Communist Party of England. So you've got those two groups there. Fascism, Amandeep, okay, comes from the Italian word. I'm just going to shut the door a minute. There's all the wind picking up behind me. Okay, so fascism is a political ideology that originates from Italy. It's an Italian word. It comes from the Italian word for a bundle of sticks, a fascinotto, which was the symbol for the party, and it came about under a leader called Mussolini. It's not the same as Nazism, it's slightly different, but it was this sort of like one leader, powerful government that everyone would sort of follow along with that. That's what fascism comes from. So it's a political ideology. So within our topic, what we're looking at, and as Mr. Wright pointed out at the beginning, the centre is where most of it's happening. But as we progress through, it's the tensions on either end of the political spectrum that start to pull the Weimar government apart.
That people had these ideas, actually these ideas became more physical, okay, and they materialized into uprising and revolts. And I know some of you actually mentioned that, okay, there might be violence that pursues. Now, in front of you, you should all see this map, and it sort of highlights the political violence in Germany from 1919 to 1923. And what you'll notice is that there's violence coming from the left and there's violence coming from the right, okay? And it happens over a period of time. Now, the two main events that we will be looking at, if you see this box up at the top, is Spartacus Rising and the Cat Putsch. Those are the two main events that we sort of need to know about. If I sort of start off talking about the Spartacus Rising, that was something that, you know, that was inspired by communist ideologies. Now, the Spartacists were a group that sort of came about during the World War, but actually they came into prominence just after the war ended. There were sort of a few disruptions in December 1918, okay, and these disruptions were quickly shut down by the president, Ebert, who we sort of mentioned last week, and Ebert sort of used the state-based army as well as a group called the Freikorps. Now, the Freikorps were a paramilitary group, and if you are unsure what paramilitary means, they're quite like the army, but they're not the state army, so they're different. And these two groups were used to sort of take out those sort of demonstrations that happened in the end of 1918. But as you can see, there was more violence in the new year, in January 1919, and the Spartacists, you know, wanted to overthrow the government. They took a lot of inspiration from what was happening in Russia at the time. So in 1918, hopefully you should know that Russia had the Russian Revolution, and actually the provisional government had been overthrown by Lenin and Trotsky, and you know, a communistic regime had been placed. And you know, people who had those communist ideas in Germany sort of looked to Russia and thought, okay, it was possible in Russia to have to overthrow the government and have a communist regime. Why is it, you know, could that be possible in Germany? And that was what was tried with the Spartacus Rising. The Spartacus Rising had two leaders. You have Rosa Luxemburg and you have Karl Liebknecht. And during this rising, they were actually killed because the rising was unsuccessful. Both the army and the Freikorps were successful in, you know, sort of defeating them, and that was, you know, the outcome of the Spartacus Rising. Whilst the Spartacus Rising, you know, was unsuccessful, that doesn't mean that left-wing, you know, violence stopped there. And I think I want to emphasize that because as you can see, you know, between 1990 and 1923, there are events that pop up to do with left-wing, you know, groups. So it's important to remember that actually we focus on these two main events, but there are lots of different groups that have similar ideas. If we have a look at the event, an event to do with right-wing tension and violence, we have a look at the Cat Putsch. Now that happened in 1920, and that came about because Ebert sort of said he wanted to reduce the size of the army and he wanted to get rid of the Freikorps. And actually, many people disagreed with that. They didn't like that. And one of those people was an MP from Berlin called Wolfgang Kapp. Kapp decided that actually he in Berlin was going to overthrow the government for a right-wing government, and he was going to be the chancellor. And actually he, in collaboration with the Freikorps and some of the Berlin soldiers that were part of the state army, they were actually successful in sort of securing Berlin. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to have, what is the word? They wanted there to be a strike, okay? So they wanted, you know, the city to go into strike, and that is how they would get their support. And so what Ebert did was Ebert got the support of the trade unions and he got the support of the civil servants, and he told them not to go and strike, which meant Kapp had no support there. So ultimately the Cat Putsch failed. And like I said about the communists as well, when we think about right-wing threats, they happen throughout, you know, this time period. It's not that the Cat Putsch happened and that was the end of, you know, right-wing uprisings. They actually still continue to happen. I have, I don't know if I went through that quite quickly. I currently can't see if there are any questions, but if there are any questions, please put them up in the chat so that Mr. McGuinness, Mr. Thomas Perkins can answer them. But I know I have currently spoken quite a lot and given out a lot of information to you. But what we'd like you to do with this information is two things. You have a short activity you need to do. The first is answer the question of what political threats did the Weimar Republic face? And the second is, which extremist political group was the biggest threat to the Weimar Republic? The first question sort of links to what I have been talking about, and the second question links to what, your personal opinions of which extremist political group you thought was the biggest threat. And obviously with that question comes the why. You need to explain it.